This video covers the second half of the Virginia Convention. The ideas of Montesquieu continue to influence the debates. Opponents of ratification said the federal government would exercise powers beyond those expressly enumerated, and thus it was not safe to ratify the Constitution. Advocates of ratification countered that the federal government would only be able to exercise those powers expressly enumerated and delegated to it, and because of that, this government was safe to ratify. Another way of stating this divide was this a consolidated government or not? If so, Montesquieu's prediction about the large country being despotic were true, and thus this Constitution was not safe. If it was not a consolidated government, then this was a safe government to ratify.
The liberty of the press is supposed to be in danger. If it ever will be suppressed in this country, the liberty of the people will not be far from being sacrificed. Where is the danger of it? Henry says that every power is given to the general government that is not reserved to the states. Pardon me if I say the reverse of the proposition is true. I defy anyone to prove the contrary. Every power not given it by this system is left with the states. This being the principle, from what part of the Constitution can the liberty of the press be said to be in danger?
The fact that the federal government has no power over the press means freedom of the press is protected. Silence in the Constitution on a particular power means the federal government does not have that power.
Freedom of religion is said to be in danger. No power is given expressly to Congress over religion. The senators and representatives, members of the state legislatures, and executive and judicial officers are bound, by oath or affirmation, to support this Constitution. This only binds them to support it in the exercise of the powers constitutionally given it.
Again, an advocate of ratification says that silence in the Constitution on a particular federal power means the federal government does not have that power, and officers are not obliged to follow it.
The powers of the general government relate to external objects and are but few. But the powers in the states relate to those great objects which immediately concern the prosperity of the people. Let us observe also that the powers in the general government are those which will be exercised mostly in time of war, while those of the state governments will be exercised in time of peace.
As a matter of general political philosophy, Madison is, I think, correct. The general government was intended to handle defense and foreign affairs and international trade, and the states were intended to handle those things which are interior affairs of a state.
The gentleman last up, William Grayson, says that the power of legislation includes everything. A general power of legislation does. But this proposed government is a special power of legislation. Therefore, it does not contain that plenitude of power which he imagines. They cannot legislate in any case, but those particularly enumerated.
This is one of those instances in which an advocate of ratification compares the Constitution to a power of attorney. There are two types, a general and a special power of attorney. If you give someone a general power of attorney, then he can do anything in your name. If you give him a special power of attorney to someone, then he can do only the thing that is specified. The Constitution is analogous to a special power of attorney. The federal government can only exercise those powers that are specifically enumerated and delegated to it.
Is there not a demonstrable difference between the principle of the state government and of the general government? There is not a word said, in the state government, of the powers given to it because they are general. But in the general Constitution, its powers are enumerated. Is it not, then, fairly deducible that it has no power but what is expressly given it? For if its powers were to be general, an enumeration would be needless.
Randolph is drawing a distinction between the nature of the powers of a state and the general government. In the latter case, it has no powers but what are expressly given it, and here is an effective argument in favor of this interpretation. If the federal government can employ any powers it wanted, why bother enumerating federal powers?
Has the government of the United States power to make laws on every subject? Can they go beyond the delegated powers? If they were to make a law not warranted by any of the powers enumerated, it would be considered by the judges as an infringement of the Constitution which they are to guard.
According to John Marshall, the future Supreme Court Justice, if the federal government goes beyond the powers that are delegated to it, it is an infringement of the Constitution, and the courts will rule it so. Now, when he had a chance to cash the check he had written here, he failed to do so, but that's another story.
Speaking of George Wythe's ratification instrument, a more positive and unequivocal declaration of the principle of the adoption, that everything not granted is reserved, could not be given. This is obviously and self-evidently the case, without the declaration. Can the general government exercise any power not delegated? Does the Constitution say that they shall not alter the law of descents, or do those things which would subvert the whole system of the state laws? If it did, what was not accepted would be granted. Does it follow, from the omission of such restrictions, that they can exercise powers not delegated? The reverse of the proposition holds. The delegation alone warrants the exercise.
According to the father of the Constitution, the only thing that warrants the federal government exercising a power is the delegation in the Constitution of that power. Advocate of ratification after advocate told the skeptical or the cautious delegates of the Virginia Convention that the federal government would only be allowed to exercise those powers expressly delegated to it, and that if it attempted to go beyond those powers, it would be a violation of the Constitution.